Great. If not, let us begin. And this is a class, so you're welcome to chime in with comments or in the text box, or if you want, I don't know if you could comment. I see everyone's muted, so I don't know if you could speak, but you could definitely text in your comments. So our first topic for this series, which is called Jewish Essentials, is the subject of God, the Torah, and the Jewish people. Now, why did I think of this title? Because there's a famous quote in the Zohar, in the Kabbalah, that says, Talat Kishrin Miskashrin Dabada. There are three links that connect one to another. Yisrael Ba'oraita, the Jewish nation with the Torah, Va'oraita Bekucha Barichu, and the Torah with Almighty God. So the Zohar, the Kabbalah, describes our relationship with God like three links of a chain. There is God, there is the Jewish nation, and there's the Torah in the middle that connects us to God. So that's why I figured, we're starting the Torah anew. We're already up to the third Torah portion, but we had Simchat Torah just literally a week ago. We finished the Torah, we're starting again. So this is a good time to talk about the importance of the Torah, the centrality of the Torah, and how it connects God and the Jewish people. So let us begin by saying that we all know that if I ask anyone, what's the most sacred object in Judaism? Immediately everyone says the Torah. So we know that the Torah is the most holy, divine gift that God gave humanity in general and the Jewish people specifically. So what is it about the Torah that makes it stand out above all else? And we just came from Simchat Torah, and we find something interesting on Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah is really a microcosm of what we do all year round. We love the Torah, we embrace the Torah, we kiss the Torah, we dance with the Torah. I can't think of another book, and maybe you can, that you'll ever kiss. You don't finish reading a book and you kiss the book. When you were in school and you studied math or science or whatever subjects, you didn't kiss the book. Lawyers or judges in a courtroom don't carry their books and dance around with them and hug them and kiss them. That would be a little crazy, right? It's a good book. It has a lot of wisdom, a lot of truth, a lot of knowledge. We respect books. We treat them properly, but we don't physically kiss them and embrace them and dance with them. So obviously, what are we embracing and what are we kissing? When the Torah goes around, everyone kisses the Torah. What are we kissing? We're trying to kiss God, so to speak. Think of someone who gets a letter from their lover, from their spouse, who's in a distant country. You could imagine that they'll read the letter and then they may even kiss the letter. Why? Because they're not kissing the piece of paper or the parchment or the ink. They're kissing the essence of the person they love that's communicated and expressed in that letter. When we kiss the Torah, what we're trying to do is get as close to God as we can. We know that God is infinite, we're finite. God is completely spiritual, we're physical. God is non-corporeal, we are physical humans. So how do we establish a connection with God? How can the finite connect with the infinite? How can a spiritual being, a divine being, connect with a human being? And the answer in one word is the Torah. Because if you want to have a relationship with someone, you want to be as connected to them as possible. You want to have the most deepest, most intimate understanding of their being, of their essence, of who they are, and what their desires are, and what their dreams are. Because the more you can understand their essence, their dreams, their desires, their vision, their perspective, the more you could align yourself with that, and the more intimate relationship you could have with that person. Now, the same thing is true with God. The more we comprehend of God through his Torah, which is his written, communicated word to us. The more we understand God's dreams and visions for humanity, the more we understand God's desires. His mitzvot are his desires, what he desires and what he does not desire, things we should and things we should not be doing, right? The more we could remain in sync with his will, with his desires, the more we can cling and attach ourselves to him, even though we're physical and he is completely spiritual, he is infinite and we is finite. And that's why Jews love the Torah so much, because our greatest desire is to be in a relationship with God. And so if you look at the past, the Torah was given to Moses, from the first prophet, Moses, to the last prophet, Malachi, about 1,000-year span, which is the Tanakh, the Torah, Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. And then from the end of the last prophet, Malachi, until the end of the Babylonian Talmud, the Mishnah, the Talmud, all the oral tradition is another 1,000 years of interpretation of the Torah. And then the last 1,000 years, give or take, is the interpretation of the oral tradition. So when you look at the Torah, it's a conversation through the generations. And there has never been anything more paramount in Jewish life than Jewish education. Every parent always knew what it says in the Shema. You know, what is the Shema? If you look at the structure of the Shema, you could understand it all. The Shema begins by saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." First thing is know and believe there's one God. No God, one God. The next verse says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul." So you should love God. And what's the third verse in the Shema? "And these words of Torah, commanding you today, shall be placed upon your heart." How will you know God? How will you understand God to the best of our human capacity, which is very limited? How will we come to love God? Through these words of the Torah. And then the very next verse says, "And you shall teach it to your children when you sit in your house, when you go on the way, when you go to sleep, when you wake up." So first, know God, love God. How? Learning his Torah, and then transmitting it and communicating it and teaching it to your children. And then what's the next verse in the Shema? "You should bind it on your hand and in your heart." Meaning to say, intellectually and emotionally, the head and the seat of the heart, on your left hand next to your heart, internalize it. And then put it on your doorposts of your home, meaning to say, imbue your home with these words of the Torah. And that's why if you walk into any Jewish home, the first thing you see is the mezuzah, which is in the Shema, but it doesn't stop at the doorpost. It continues in the home. In every Jewish home, you'll see Jewish artifacts. You'll see Kiddush cups. You'll see menorahs. You'll see candelabras. You'll see lots of Jewish artifacts. But in every Jewish home, you'll see Jewish books. There's always a bookshelf or a bookcase or many bookcases of Jewish texts. Because part of a Jewish home is, you need a charity box in the home, and you need a mezuzah on your door, and you need a menorah for Hanukkah, and you need a Shabbos candles for Friday night. But you need books to study Torah on a daily basis. Now, I want you to know there's a very famous passage in Exodus where Moses is traveling in the wilderness with the Jewish people, and it says they traveled for 3 days without water, and they came to a place called Maratah, which means bitterness, and they couldn't drink the water because they were bitter, and they complained against Moses, and Moses cried out to God, and God said, "Take a stick, a wooden tree, and throw it into the water," and the waters became sweet. And then it says at the end of this verse, "And then and there God taught them the laws and the decrees and the ordinances." And the question is, what's going on here? We're talking about a lack of water in the wilderness, and then they complain the water's bitter, and then Moses is told by God to take a branch of a stick and throw it in the water, and the water gets sweet. And then suddenly it says, "And then Moses taught them Torah." And then it goes on to say, and Moses says, if you listen to the voice of God and you do what's proper in his eyes and you hearken to his commandments and guard his statutes, and then you will be blessed. And our rabbis famously in the Talmud give an interesting interpretation. If you come to the synagogue, how many times a week do we read Torah in the synagogue publicly? So we know that there are exceptions, holidays and Rosh Chodesh, but on a typical average week, every Monday morning, Thursday morning, and Saturday morning, 3 times a week, we take out the Torah and read the Torah publicly, right? So the question is, why was that instituted to read Torahs on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays? And our rabbis in the Talmud tell us it's based on this passage. You see, the wilderness is a metaphor for the world. The Jews were traveling in the wilderness. They were weary, they were fatigued, they were tired. And so therefore what happened? God says they became bitter, they became quarrelsome, they became discontented, unhappy, because they didn't have the spiritual waters. Water is always a metaphor for Torah, which quenches our spiritual thirst. So God says, take the tree and throw it in the water. What is the tree? We sing in the synagogue, Eitz Chaim Hi, it's a tree of life to those who cling to it. And then the waters became sweetened. When we put the Torah into our lives, suddenly our taste buds physically and spiritually and emotionally change. We start having appreciation and gratitude and satisfaction and meaning and purpose. And therefore God says, put the stick, meaning the branch, the tree of life, into the water. And that's why, what does Moses do then and there? He starts teaching them Torah at this location where they were quarreling and complaining about the water. And our rabbis say, what do we learn from this? How many days did the Jews go without water before they started complaining? 3 days. So our rabbis say we should never go 3 days without Torah study. And that's why every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, 3 times over the 7-week period, 7-day period, we study Torah publicly. So no 3 days should go by without studying Torah. So if you want to know at a minimum how often a Jew has to study Torah, this passage would indicate no less than once every 3 days. But there's another passage in the Torah that says you should engage and study Torah day and night, which our rabbis in the Jewish law say that no 12-hour period should go by without studying Torah. So once during the day, once during the nighttime, morning and evening, one should study Torah. How much Torah? That depends on your occupation, how much time you have, but at least one passage of Torah, one bite of Torah, one idea of Torah in the morning and one in the evening. So you see that Torah is very much like, just like you have physical sustenance and nourishment for your body, you need spiritual nourishment, which is the Torah. Now, we know that there's something else that's very unique about the Torah, and that is that before you study Torah, you make a blessing on the Torah. Now, it's not just those who get called to the Torah. There's a prayer every morning thanking God for the commandment to study Torah. You must thank God for the Torah before you study it. Now, this, again, is unique. Why? Because you don't say a prayer of thanks to God for other forms of knowledge, only for Torah study. Why is that? Because we want to remind ourselves that Torah study is different than all other study. Why is it different than all other study? Because it's divine. And therefore, you're connecting to God when you study Torah. It's not just like any other subject that you're just doing it for the sake of the knowledge. As I started the class by saying, there's God, the Torah, and the Jewish people. Through the Torah, we connect to Hashem. And therefore, when we study Torah, we make a blessing, acknowledging that God gave us the Torah. And therefore, we acknowledge that we are now entering into a conversation, into a relationship with Hashem through the study of the Torah. And that's why you must make a blessing before you begin to study Torah. And when someone gets called to the Torah, they say, Baruch Hu Hashem, Baruch Hashabach Habanu, you chose us from all the nations, you gave us our Torah. And we first acknowledge that this is God's Torah. It's a divine document. As a matter of fact, the 10 Commandments begins with the word Anochi, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And our rabbis say, it doesn't say the more common word, which is Ani, I am the Lord your God. It says Anochi, and they say it's an acronym for 4 words. Ana, Nafshi, Savit, Yahavit, which means I, my soul, I wrote down and gave over to you. So obviously God is infinite. We cannot comprehend God fully, but the degree that we could relate and understand God's greatness, he communicated that, he instilled that into the Torah. And therefore, when we study Torah, it's not just, when people study knowledge, if you study knowledge, it's usually a means to an end. So I study medicine because I want to be a doctor. I study law because I want to be a lawyer. I study engineering. It's a tool to be able to accomplish something that's beyond the knowledge. The knowledge is going to lead me to something that I'm trying to get to. It's not an end unto itself. The study of Torah is an end unto itself. Jews study Torah their whole life. You could be 99 years old, you're still studying Torah. It's not like you need the knowledge to do something with it. Yes, to live as a Jew, to know how to practice Judaism, to know how to observe the commandments, but and to try to make yourself a better person. When your baby's born, they're born uncircumcised. God made a beautiful baby. Couldn't God have finished the job and circumcised the baby? God made the baby with all the limbs and all the organs and the blood vessels and so much, millions and millions of details. Couldn't he circumcise the child? And the reason God leaves it uncircumcised, because it's symbolic. And the symbolism is, I've done my part, now you have to do your part to refine, to perfect, to improve yourself. And so it's a lifelong journey of self-discovery, self-growth, perfection, refinement, enhancement, raising up our midot, our traits, our character traits. Most education focuses on tools and skills and know-how. It doesn't answer the questions of why. When you go to school in secular education, they'll give you a score on how you did on the knowledge. But there's no one in school gives you a score on how compassionate you are as a child, or how respectful. In other words, what really matters in life, above all else, is what kind of human beings we are. And unfortunately, our secular knowledge or school system really, if you go to a Jewish school, they'll have something called midot, where they give special awards for good character traits, for good qualities. I was just visiting our son in law school, and I remember the story of this girl graduated as a doctor, valedictorian. And when she finished the graduation, her parents and her grandparents were walking with her through the streets of the university campus to go out to a restaurant to celebrate her graduation with honors. And they passed a homeless guy on the corner. And this homeless guy sees this young lady in her cap and gown, and by her first name says, "Oh, Julie, congratulations that you graduated." And he gets up and he congratulates her. And then he says, "Are these your parents and your grandparents?" And she says, "Yeah, meet my father, my mother, my grandparents." And this homeless guy looks at the parents and he said, "I want you to know something. I sit on this corner and most of the students just walk by me every day on the way to class. They barely notice me. Some of them put a few coins in my cup. But your daughter always stops to smile at me, say good morning to me, good afternoon in the afternoon. Sometimes she'll bring me something to eat from the cafeteria. And you have such a wonderful, kind, compassionate, sweet, lovely daughter." And the parents thanked the homeless man for the kind words. And later, the father turned to his daughter and said, "Julie, I want you to know something. When I was in that graduation hall and I watched you up there as the valedictorian, medical school, cap and gown, I thought this was my proudest moment as a parent, that I raised such a wonderful daughter like you. I was so proud to be your father. But I want to tell you something," he said to her. "When that homeless man told me how compassionate, how kind, how caring you are, how you bring him lunch from the cafeteria, you always cheer him up every day, I was even prouder than I was in the graduating hall as a father." He said, "Because in the graduation hall, I was proud of the fact that you're brilliant, you're accomplished, you're successful, you're a wonderful student. But what that homeless man made me realize is that I not only raised a bright, accomplished daughter, but more importantly, a kind and compassionate human being. And what this world really needs, of course, the world needs knowledge and wisdom and truth, But the world needs a heart, compassion, good quality human beings, human beings who love kindness and goodness, and that's what the Torah is here to teach us and guide us in. And that's why it's a lifelong pursuit, the study of Torah. So if you look at the first word of the Torah, everyone knows the first word of the Torah is Bereshit, in the beginning. But I'll show this to you, but you could check it out in your Chumash, but it's actually this way in the Torah. The first letter of the Torah is Bereshit. You must probably can see it, but it's written with a big letter bet, a big bet. Now, bet is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And one of the first Rashis, French 11th century scholar, quotes the Midrash that says that if you take away the letter bet, you have the word Reshit, beginnings. So by making it a big bet, what the Torah is saying is bet Reshit, two beginnings, two firsts. Reshit means the first. Two number ones. That God created the world for two primary reasons. What was the two primary reasons? And this is a direct quote from Rashi and the rabbis. Bishvil HaTorah, for the sake of the Torah, which is called the first of God's fruit, and for the sake of the Jewish nation, which are the first of God's creations. And he brings different verses to show that the Jewish people in the Torah are referred to as primary, as first, as number one. Now, what does that mean? God made the world for the sake of the Torah and the Jewish people. So rabbis explain, for the sake that the Jewish people should receive the Torah and implement it in the world. So there's a universal relationship God has with all of mankind, Adam, Eve, Noah, we just read about Noah, and then a particular relationship with the Jewish people. And the Jewish people the Torah was often to all the nations of the world. The Jewish people accepted the Torah, and we accepted this responsibility to bring the Torah down to earth and teach it to mankind, and to be the embodiment or the ambassadors of the values of the Torah. Why? And it's so much so that a rabbi say that when God finished creating the world, I won't get into all the nuances, but God made a condition with the world that I'm only creating you so long as the Jewish people accept my Torah. Because without the Torah, I can't have a world. But if they accept the Torah and they apply the Torah to the world, then the world can exist. And that's why when the Jewish people said Naseh v'nishma, the world was relieved, because it knew it will continue to exist, not revert to nothingness. Now the question is, why is Torah so critical that had the Jewish people not accepted the Torah, God would say, I cannot have a world without the Torah? Without the Jewish people accepting my Torah, without the bet reshit, the two primary forces in the world, which is Torah and the Jewish people. And so when you look at the history of the world, you find there are three things. There is creation. That's the first big story. Then the second big story is redemption, the exodus from Egypt. And then there is revelation, which is the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai. So you have creation, redemption, and revelation. Those are the three big acts in the beginning of history of mankind. And what the rabbis explain is that what is redemption? Creation is the work of God. Revelation is the word of God. And when you apply the word of God to the work of God, that's what equals redemption. And therefore, for the world to function and be a redeemed world, it needs the Torah, the word of God, to communicate to the work of God and to be implemented in the work of God to create a redeemed world. Now, let me start by saying this in simple language. In simple language, if you want to understand, the word Torah doesn't mean Bible. The word Torah means hora'ah, like mora, a teacher. The Torah is a book of lessons. So if you go out and buy a new computer, it comes with an instruction manual. Who wrote the instruction manual for the computer? The creator of the computer, the company that invented and created the computer, knows how the computer is meant to run, and therefore gives you instructions. Now, you could say, I don't want to read the book. I'll just figure it out on my own. But the chances of you figuring out all the bells and whistles of the computer by yourself, first of all, it'll take you a lifetime, but you'll waste a lot of time. But second of all, you most probably won't figure out 90% of the things that the computer is capable of doing. God created the world, and therefore God gave us a manual, an instruction manual, a book of instructions. Of you may look at the Torah like, oh, it's stories, it's morals, it's history, it's laws, it's a whole, seems like almost like a hodgepodge of different things. But really, every word in the Torah, every story, every piece of history is there to teach us and to guide us. It's an instruction manual for our lives. Everything in the Torah is meant to teach us and instruct us. So that's the simple idea of what the Torah is. It's God's directives of how to live in this world. On a deeper level, if you get into Zohar and Kabbalah, mysticism, it explains that the words of God created the world. God said, let there be light, there was light. And the Hebrew letters and the Hebrew words is what brought the world into existence. So the way Kabbalah explains it is, if you go to a movie theater, right, and you're watching a movie, and you see a picture on the screen, is that picture a reality? It's just the light of the projector projecting that onto the screen. Now, if you turn off the projector, the images are gone. Imagine the Torah as being that projector. In other words, it's not that the Torah is relating to the world. The world is designed according to the Torah. That's why it says the Torah is the blueprints for creation. And the very words of God, and I don't want to get too deep and philosophical, but it's God's energy of his communication, of his words of the Torah that actually give life and sustenance and brought the world into existence. And therefore, not only is the Torah a manual for a world that exists independent of the Torah, but like that metaphor of the projector, without the Torah, there is no world. The world is only an outcome of the words of Hashem that brought the whole world into existence, because there was nothing before God created it. God's words brought them into existence, created it. And therefore, it's the words of the Torah that continue to sustain the world. But the idea is, and to use a practical analogy that we could all understand, is God creates the world. And then that's the first book of the Torah. Then the second book, Pharaoh enslaves the Jewish people. God sends Moses, let my people go, redeems the Jewish people. What does Moses tell the Jewish people upon their exodus? How should they commemorate the holiday of Passover each and every year? What is Moses' instruction from God? God says, okay, I took you out of Egypt. Now you have a commandment, Passover. Every year on the anniversary of your freedom, you should have a Passover Seder. And you should sit around the table with your children and your grandchildren and tell them the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And teach them about the fact that every human being is in the image of God. And therefore, no human being has a right to oppress or enslave another human being, because God demands the freedom of every human being. Because since we are in the image of God, we are all meant to be like God, to be free human beings. And we educate our children about the values of respecting the dignity of every human being, of no human being oppressing another human being. And we have countless commandments in the Torah where the Torah says, do this or don't do that, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So love the stranger in your midst, and do not oppress the widow or the orphan or the downtrodden or the poor, or give charity, because you were once the downtrodden, oppressed nation in Egypt, right? So think about this. Most people, and this is something that's so fascinating, by the way, we could talk about this for the rest of the class, but the Exodus from Egypt happened 3,300 years ago. And where were you, everyone on the Zoom, where were we last Passover? At the Seder table, doing what Moses told us to do 3,300 years ago in an uninterrupted chain in our families. And what is God telling Moses? What God's telling Moses is, how do you keep law and order in a society? How do you bring redemption to a world? So if somebody's enslaved, right? You want to free them. You want to redeem them from slavery. That's what God did. He redeemed us. But then God gave us the Torah. And you know what the Torah is? The Torah is like preventive medicine. It makes sure that you don't go into that circumstance in the first place. And therefore the Torah says, teach your children in every generation how to respect the dignity of other human beings, and how to never take advantage of those who are weak or vulnerable, or the minorities or the strangers in your society. Don't let the elite class, the powerful, oppress the powerless, which is human nature, right? Take advantage of those who are weaker. But no, the Torah says show respect to the every human being in the image of God. And by teaching these lessons to our children in every generation, what God's saying is there'll be no need to redeem somebody from slavery, because there won't be slavery in the first place. There's a story in the Talmud about a certain general who came to a town, and he said, the Jewish community said, show me the defenders of the city. The Ture Karta, it's actually called. So they brought out the soldiers. He said, no, they're the destroyers of the city. Bring me the defenders of the city. They said, what do you mean? Who are the defenders of the city? He said, I want to see the children who are studying Torah. They're the defenders of the city. Who defends the city? Is it the army? Is it the police force? Or is it the educational values that are taught to the children in childhood and throughout their lives? Because even adults at all ages continue to learn Torah. That makes sure that we don't need, you only need a police officer or a army when people are no longer obeying the law. But the laws, when they're engraved on the minds and the hearts of the children and the society, then you have a moral, ethical, righteous society that there's no need for the police or for the army. Of course, you're always going to need that, and the Torah says every society should have police officers and judges. But the goal is that you don't have that circumstance in the first place. Why? Because Moses says, don't make a big victory parade on the anniversary from the Exodus from Egypt. Don't build a big statue of Moses in the middle of Jerusalem for everyone to see. You know, you won't find statues of Moses anywhere, or statues of any great biblical personality in Judaism. If you go to other countries, right, all the great heroes, George Washington, Columbus, you know, big statues all over, right? But in Judaism, you could go to Israel, there's no statues of Moses or King David, or because you know what the statue of Moses is? When you teach your children what Moses taught us. That's what Moses wants. Moses doesn't want to live on in a stone. He wants to live on in the minds and the hearts of children. And that's just another beautiful thing about Jewish education, just as a sidebar, is that as parents, we need all the help we can to raise our children. So parents have to come up with a value system that they want to teach their kids. If you teach your children Torah, if you bring them to synagogue, if we read the weekly Torah portion, if you study religious texts, ethics of our fathers, it's all thousands of years Jews have been discussing values and ethics and morals. And I think we see today the breakdown in our society. I think you see the breakdown in society today. I don't want to get into it, but we talk about wisdom versus Torah, and we'll get into it a little bit more soon. The Talmud says if someone tells you there's Torah amongst the nations, if someone says there's wisdom amongst the nations of the world, believe it, the Talmud says. But if someone says there's Torah amongst the nations of the world, don't believe it. Why? Because, and I see Ira asked the question, was there Torah before Mount Sinai? So the answer is yes and no. Why? Officially, there was not, because the covenant of God and the Jewish people, the marriage contract, so to speak, the constitution of the Jewish people was given at Mount Sinai. But while that was the formal declaration, it says that even before God created the world, God used the Torah as the blueprint, because God wanted to design a world based on the values of the Torah. So, and this is a very deep subject in itself. It's not that we have a world and now we build values to accommodate the world. The world was designed to accommodate the values of the Torah. So why is this important? Because a person sometimes says, well, I can't keep this commandment. It's not in my nature. It's not in my personality to do X, Y, or Z. It could be anything, okay? Person can say, I'm stingy by nature. I know the Torah says you should give charity, but it's not in my nature to give away my hard-earned money. That one's not for me. Or maybe some other commandment. Someone may say, God wants me to pray every day. I'm not a spiritual person. I can't pray to God. I just don't have it in me. I've met many people who, over the years, said to me, Rabbi, I wish I could have faith in God. It would make my life a lot easier, but I'm a scientific type of person. Faith doesn't work for me, right? And a person could believe that about themselves. I'm not spiritual. I'm sure people tell you that I'm not a spiritual person, right? Well, you know what? Every morning we have this beautiful prayer we say. It's called Moda Ani. And the first thing we say is, Almighty God, thank you for putting my soul back into my body, for making me become alive. But we don't stop there. We go a step further. And what do we say? We say, Elokai, Neshama Shanasata Bi, this soul that you put into me, Tahorahi, it's pure. You created, you breathed it into my nostrils, you guard it within me. In other words, we start the day by reminding ourselves every day that what is my essence? My essence is spiritual. The one part of me that is non-contaminable, that always remains pristine and pure and can never be, God forbid, ever tainted or defiled, no matter what, is my soul. It's a part of God. There's a piece of God in me. So my relationship with God is from within. And therefore, what do you mean you're not spiritual? Maybe you need to uncover your spirituality, but you are spiritual because if you have a part of God in you, you have to be spiritual. That's your primary essence. That's your being. The whole idea of teshuvah in Judaism is going back to who you really are, because anything you become, any negative habits or behaviors that we've adopted is not who we really are. Our true essence from birth. And I don't have to tell you, in the world of psychology, we talk about trauma and all that stuff. It's all stuff that was put upon us later by circumstances, by parents, by whatever. But and healing from trauma is going back to that safe, holistic place within all of us before these negative things were communicated to us. So we all understand this idea of the neshama, but the idea that the God created the world, when people say, well, in other words, when you look at the Torah, you may ask, is it idealistic or is it realistic? Maybe the Torah is, in Judaism, the Torah is not just for the saints or the pious or the super righteous or the rabbis. It's for every Jew has the same Torah. There's no commandments that a rabbi has to keep that a regular Jew doesn't have to keep, a layman has to keep. We're all in the same set of commandments. Why? Because Torah is not written as an outer, in other religions, you have monks in a monastery, right? Or priests, right? They live this super religious life. They don't get married. They're in isolation. They don't talk. But that's not for everybody. Not everyone can live that life. So they're like, okay, the very religious people, the nuns, they do this, but not the average person. The Torah is written for everyone because the Torah is the blueprint for creation. The world was designed to conform or to function according to the instructions and the dictates of the Torah. And therefore, there can never be a contradiction between the world and the Torah, or human nature and the Torah. Sometimes we have to bend our nature to conform to the Torah, because it could be a test, it could be a challenge for us. But going to your question, Ira, the Torah is the foundation of creation. And therefore, our rabbis say that the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the ones God chose Abraham, which is this week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha, God shared with them the Torah in advance of its giving at Mount Sinai. So it wasn't in effect yet. They didn't have to perform the commandments yet. They were not instructed yet. The formal declaration happened at Mount Sinai, but they already studied Torah. We have all the midrashim that talk about the patriarchs and matriarchs I mentioned yesterday in the sermon. Shem, who was the progenitor of Abraham, was the first one to establish a house of study. So they did have Torah. They did study Torah. And therefore, genetically, our ancestors have, while we got the Torah from Moses 3,300 years ago, spiritually, the traits and the practices of Judaism have been practiced already 3,700 years ago, going all the way back to Abraham and Sarah. So how does our soul, which is instilled within each and every one of us, connect with God? It's through the Torah. The Torah is, and There's a beautiful passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says that when God gave the Torah, it was black fire written on a white fire. Now, what does that mean? Clearly, it's very esoteric. We know that the Torah is compared to many things. The Torah is compared to fire because it radiates warmth, it radiates light. The Torah is considered a light. The Torah is also referred to as honey. The Torah is referred to as milk. The Torah is referred to as there are many metaphors to describe the Torah. But one of them is fire, light. But what does it mean, black fire and white fire? So when you look at a parchment of Torah, you have the letters which are black, and then the white spaces around the Torah. And the message is that it's not just the words, but what's communicated, as we say, between the lines. And that's what the rabbis have done for thousands of years. Try to extract all the deeper meaning of the words of the Torah. That's what the sages in the Talmud and the Mishnah, and then all the commentaries down to our present day have done, delved into Torah. Because if, there's a famous quote in Pirkei Avot, Ben Bagbag Omer, Ben Bagbag says, Hafachba v'hafachba, turn the pages, turn it over, turn the pages, the kulaba, because everything is contained in it. And what Ben Bagbag is saying is that not just spiritual teachings and life is in the Torah, but all wisdom is contained in the Torah. That's why there's a teaching in Pirkei Avot says that if somebody's walking on the road and they're studying Torah and they stop to admire nature and they say, how beautiful is this tree, says Pirkei Avot, they're guilty for their soul. And the question is, what's the sin? What's wrong with admiring a beautiful tree that God created? And Rav Kook says that if you look at the word of the Mishnah, it says, Umafsik mi mishnato, he interrupts his learning, meaning he sees nature and the world as an interruption of his learning. Then he's guilty for his soul. Because really, all the wisdom of the world, all the sciences, all the wisdoms are contained within the Torah, because Torah is the blueprint for all of creation. And that, if you may have heard this beautiful midrash that says, the Talmud actually says that when a baby's in the womb, there's an angel that teaches the baby the whole Torah. And then when the baby leaves, the angel taps it on the lip and everything's forgotten. So even before you were born in utero, you were learning Torah. Why did you forget it? So you should be able to toil in Torah and accomplish through your understanding, through your reasoning, understand the Torah. As someone once put it, they said, Jews don't learn to live. We live to learn. And therefore, it's a lifelong pursuit. So throughout your life, you're studying Torah, but it resonates deep in your soul. Why? Because you've already learned it. Subconsciously, you know all these truths to be the case because you've already studied it with the angel back in utero. To use one of the best stories I could use to illustrate what Torah is for a Jew is the famous story of the great sage Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva taught Torah during the days of the Romans, and the Romans forbade the study of Torah. Rabbi Akiva kept on teaching Torah, and there was a certain individual by the name of Ben Papas. He said to Rabbi Akiva, you're endangering your life by studying Torah. And one of the most beautiful, famous analogies in the Talmud that Rabbi Akiva says, the great Rabbi Akiva only started learning Torah at the age of 40, incidentally, which is a fascinating story unto itself. He saw water dripping on a rock, and it penetrated the rock, and he said, if so many years of the water dripping made a crevice in the rock, the words of Torah, drip by drip, can penetrate my mind. And he went to study, became one of the greatest sages. So when he said to him, why are you studying Torah? You're endangering your life. What did Rabbi Akiva say? He said, let me give you a parable. He says, there were once fish swimming in the lake, in the ocean, and there was a fisherman trying to catch them with the nets. Along came the sly fox and said to the fish, why don't you come up on dry land and you'll be safe from the fisherman's nets? And the fish responded to the fox, and they said, in the water, where we stand a chance, maybe we'll survive, maybe we won't survive the nets of the fish, of the fishermen. But if we come up on dry land, we're surely going to die. Said Rabbi Akiva, A Jew without Torah is like a fish without water. If we leave the environment of the water, if we stop studying Torah, that's certain death for Judaism and the Jewish people. If we stay in the water, the Romans may persecute us, they may catch us, they may kill us, but we have a chance to live. Rabbi Kiva was caught by the Romans and was skinned alive, as we read on Yom Kippur. But his name is quoted in every study hall, in every yeshiva around the world, hundreds of times a day. Hundreds of times a day. So 2,000 years ago, he's very much alive. His teachings are alive. Why? Because he said we can't stop studying Torah. And I'm just going to tell you a little personal idea that it's not exactly part of this class, but it is part of the class. And that is that, this year has been the year of Jewish pride. And it's wonderful. Jewish pride is amazing. Am Yisrael Chai, everyone's singing, everyone's wearing their Magen Davids. We've never been prouder to be a Jewish people. Jews have gone out to demonstrations in Washington. Jewish pride is at an all-time high. But I think if there's one thing this class has to illustrate is that Jewish pride is not enough. It's wonderful. It's better than not having Jewish pride, clearly. But you need to take the next step, and that's Jewish education, knowledge, studying Torah. Because everyone, if you talk to an Irishman, I'm proud to be Irish. You talk to an Italian, he's proud to be Italian. Talk to an Asian, they're proud to be Asian. Pride is not enough. Everyone's proud of their ancestry. Why not? Everyone has good things to be proud of, and Jews surely have a lot to be proud of. So why not be proud of the great accomplishments of the Jewish people? But if you don't understand Torah, right, so the pride in itself will not keep you Jewish. Just like look at all immigrants that come to a country, right? Give it 3 generations, 4 generations, they're assimilated. They're no longer keeping the traditions. What's going to keep a Jewish continuity cannot be maintained with Jewish pride alone. There has to be Jewish knowledge of what Judaism is, what Judaism represents, the values, the teachings, the wisdom of Judaism. That's where the real pride comes into play. And that's what we need. So Jewish pride is great because it's got everyone's attention. But this is the time to really focus on what's really important. I love quoting what Dr. Cuenca from the Meyer Academy once said at the Palm Beach Synagogue when he spoke. He said this line, and it's stuck with me. He said, if you come to a community and you see a Jewish cemetery, there once was a Jewish community here. If you see a synagogue, there is a Jewish community here. But if you see a Jewish day school, there will be a Jewish community here. So, we say it in our prayers every day in the morning, Elu Dvarim, we list all the commandments that have no limit, and then we say these are the commandments that we eat the fruit in this world, but the principle remains in the next lifetime. And then list many mitzvot, taking care of the dead and the providing for a bride and kindness, and the last line in this prayer is the Talmud Torah, and the study of Torah Keneged Kulam is most paramount, equals all of them. If you want to talk practical language, right? We'll talk practical, right? What percentage of Jews give charity? Very high percentage, right? Most Jews give charity. Some more, some less, but it's hard to imagine a Jew doesn't give tzedakah on some level, right? What percentage of Jews go to shul regularly? Wow, now the number drops quite a bit, right? So I don't know, let's make up numbers. Let's say 90% of Jews give charity. Okay, 90%. How many Jews go to shul regularly? Whatever regularly is, every Shabbat or every other week or once a month. And now we're talking about 50%, let's say. Okay, let's be generous. It's probably low. It's probably 40% of Jews go on a regular basis, not just on the high holidays. Okay. Then I say, how many Jews learn Torah on a regular basis? Again, remember I said Moses said 3 days shouldn't go without studying Torah. But let's even say 1 class a week. How many Jews have a weekly class of Torah? Now, of course, when you go to synagogue, you get to learn Torah too. But outside of going to synagogue, studying Torah for either by opening a book in your home to study on your own. Today, you could learn a lot on the internet. You can learn a lot from books. We have the Art Scroll. The whole Talmud is translated. By the way, it's never been easier to study Torah than today. You have so many different sources for Torah study. Like I said, in print form or in digital form, it is endless. You can access every part of Torah today. But how many people actually make the time every week to study Torah? A much more limited amount of people, right? But here's the interesting point. There are many Jews who give charity but don't go to synagogue and surely don't study Torah. There are Jews who give charity and they go to synagogue and pray, but they don't study Torah. But how many Jews do you think there are that study Torah on a weekly basis, let's say, and don't go to synagogue and don't give charity? It's hard to imagine, right? If a Jew is learning Torah every week, of course he's going to synagogue. And of course he's giving charity. Why? Because the Torah is going to tell him that he needs to go to synagogue and pray to God. And it's going to tell him that he has to give charity. So if you start with Torah, everything else will flow naturally from the Torah. But if you just, philanthropy is very important. And thank God we have wonderful philanthropic Jews. But unless they study Torah, what do we see today? More and more Jews are giving to non-Jewish causes. Nothing wrong with giving to non-Jewish causes. But those same Jews maybe won't give to Jewish causes. So they'll give to a museum or they'll give to some university, but they won't support local Jewish institutions. Because if they were studying Torah, I think things would be different. Because if a Jew is studying Torah, he understands the importance of, yes, be a light unto the nations, give by all means to all different causes. But charity starts at home. You want Judaism to continue. You want Torah to continue in the world. That's primary importance. So once again, Torah is the bedrock. Torah is the foundation. There's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that says that there's 3 crowns. There's the crown of priesthood, the Kohanim. That was given to Aaron and his descendants. There's the crown of kingship. That was given to King David, the family of Judah and his descendants. And then there's the crown of Torah. The crown of Torah wasn't allocated to any specific group. Every Jew is an inheritor of the Torah. As we all know the verse, Torah Tzivalanu Moshe, the Torah was given to us by Moses, an inheritance to every single Jew. Every single Jew has equal access to Torah. And that's why, in America, I'm not sure what year they instituted mandatory education, right? It's illegal not to give your kid an education today, right? You could be arrested as a parent if you don't send your kid to school. Every child has to be given an education. Why? Because once the kid's already grown up, it's too late for them. They missed kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So as a parent, you have a moral obligation to educate your children. Well, that was instituted as a law in America, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago, let's say, right? You know when Jews had mandatory education? 2,000 years ago. The Talmud says that the Torah says you should teach it to your children. Every parent has to teach their child Torah. But then the rabbi saw, there was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Gala, and he saw that what happens if somebody's an orphan and he doesn't have a father to teach him Torah, or if his father is not knowledgeable. So he started to make in every community schools that every child should be given an education, because education is a requirement for every parent to teach their children. And parents always prioritize, Jewish parents always prioritize. That's why we have such an affinity for education. It started with Jewish education because why are Jews so accomplished and in the academics in every field? It goes back to our Jewish tradition 2,000 years ago, that Torah knowledge, education was primary. Parents would sacrifice everything else to make sure that children would get a proper Jewish education, because that was always, bar mitzvah, the fact that a kid at 13 was already literate, was able to read, was able to be fluent in Torah reading. This was always the primary objective of parents, because going back to the beginning of the class, there's redemption, but redemption comes when the words of the Torah, which is revelation, is applied to the creation of the world. So that is the the focus on Torah. Now, everyone knows that the Jewish people are called the people of the book. Now, simply what that means is that we read books, we write books, we love books. But why only the Jewish people? I mean, America has a lot of books too. There's a lot of great American authors. Like, are we the only one who loves books and reads books? Now, you may say, well, from the beginning of time when many people were illiterate, Jewish people were always focusing on education in the book. But I heard another beautiful answer, and that is like this. We are the only nation in the world that came to being through a book. Our peoplehood stems and originates in a book. Which book? The Torah. When we say the people of the book, which book are we talking about? We're talking about the Torah, the people of the book. And that book brought our peoplehood into existence. So most people, nations, they live in a country, they obey the laws of that country, as they should. And Jews obey the laws of whatever country they live in. The Talmud says the law of the land is the land law. In whichever country you live in, you have to obey the laws of your land. But there's an overriding law that all Jews keep, regardless of which country or land they live in, and that's the Torah. Because the birth of our nation happened at Mount Sinai when God gave us the Torah. Our relationship with God was through the Torah. And therefore, there's the law of your land, but then there's the law of God. And since God is universal and God is everywhere, no matter where a Jew lives in the world, he is subject to the laws of Hashem. And I have to just tell you that, I keep on coming back to this experience that last week I went to see our son who's in law school, Penn, right? But in his class alone in the law school, there's, I don't know what percentage, but let's say 10% of the students there eat kosher. So they had this parents partner day where families come, and then they had a lunch break, and they put out lunch for all the families that came. And there was a whole section, this whole table with kosher food, because many of the students and many of the families eat kosher. And I'm thinking to myself, how beautiful is this? That these students are learning law, American law, a couple of 100 years old, but at the same time, they're obeying the Torah's laws of kosher and Leviticus going back 3,000 years ago. And it's such a prominent group in the law school that they actually accommodate with a kosher caterer for all the people who are eating kosher, and kids with kippot and girls who are religious and families. And it just shows us the power of the Torah and the Jewish people and our connection to the Torah, that our Judaism always takes priority. And this is the time of the year, just on a practical level, we're starting the Torah again. We're 2 weeks in now. We're starting the third Torah portion. This is a great opportunity to study Torah on a weekly basis, whether it's the weekly Torah portion or other classes. The synagogue has many programs, many classes. But for the vitality and the strength and the continuity of the Jewish people has always been dependent on the depth of our engagement with Torah study. And therefore, the Torah study is like the fuel that keeps the engine running. And most importantly, the Torah is associated with joy and with happiness. Sas anochi al imrasecha, King David says, I rejoice over your Torah. Many, many verses that talk about the joy of Torah. And anyone who studied Torah knows the joy of studying Torah. Torah brings light into our lives, especially in a dark world with a lot of confusion. It gives clarity. It gives perspective. It lifts up your soul. There's so much beauty, so much inspiration in the Torah. And people turn to all these different books, self-help books and this books and that, and they're all wonderful. Any book that could help anyone is great. But we have it all contained in the Torah. As Ben Bagbag said, turn the pages, everything's in the Torah. It always pains me when I see Jews who are looking for spirituality and they start looking into, other forms of spirituality, whether it's, Buddhism, there's something called Jew booze, or other things, and sometimes they don't look within Judaism itself, or maybe they weren't exposed to it properly. And that's why, there's, even at our synagogue, we have classes on Chassidut, spiritual Hasidic thought, Kabbalah, Kabbalistic ideas. Every layer and dimension of knowledge, of wisdom, of spirituality is all contained in the Torah. And for our soul to remain connected to God, it's through the Torah. And therefore, the Torah always was and always will be the central focus of Judaism. That's why when you come into the synagogue, the holiest object is the Torah, the object we kiss and hug and embrace, because the Torah has kept the Jew, amongst many other things, obviously, but the Torah is the source of life for a Jew. And, while this is a class about the importance of Torah and the greatness of Torah, and Rabbi Akiva's analogy of, a Jew without Torah is like a fish without water. But the most important thing is the practicality of it. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe had something called the Miftzayim, the 10 campaigns that for every Jew. And one of them was called Bayit Malei Svarim, a house filled with Jewish books. So on a practical level, it means when you have a chance to buy a Jewish book, buy it, put it on your shelf, keep it next to your bed stand or your coffee table, study Torah more often, attend more classes, engage in more Torah discussion, deepen your knowledge of Torah, because the Torah is, like we said, all the commandments are done with your body. Studying Torah is like food and water. You internalize it. It becomes part of your mind. It becomes part of your heart. It becomes your inner nature and character. And it transforms you from the inside out. And therefore, Jews have always been obsessed and in love with Torah and Torah study. And may we all merit to study a lot of Torah this year. Every year is an opportunity. I'll just give you one practical example. One of our members came up to me on Simchat Torah just a week ago and said, every year I have a custom. I thought this was beautiful. He says there are 7 sections to the weekly Torah portion, right? So every year I take one section and I study that section one at a time with a new commentary. So he said, last year I studied this particular commentary. He wanted to know who I would suggest, which commentary to study the next section of the Torah. So he's not even going to do the whole Torah, because to do the whole Torah portion with a commentary could take a long time, but 1/7 of the Torah portion. So the second Aliyah, he does it on a rotating basis with a new commentary each year. And I thought it was so beautiful. We talked about different options. I showed him different commentaries. But what's beautiful is you get to see the variety of commentaries on Torah. But you also, the idea is that it's the new year. I want to discover a new commentary, a new personality and expression of Torah. And the Torah is so endless and thousands of years of commentary that there's such a wide variety of commentary to study. So find some new classes, engage more in Torah study. More than ever today, we see and we realize that the Torah is the lifeline, the blood, the spiritual lifeline of the Jewish people. And the more we learn Torah, the more we learn about ourselves, and the more we learn and understand our place in this world. And more than ever, Jews need to understand their role, their responsibilities, their place in this world. And when people hate you, you may wonder, why do they hate us? What is it that we represent that causes so much anti-Semitism? So I think more than ever, people are turning to the Torah to understand, what is it about the Jewish people? Who are we? Because if you don't even understand why people hate you, it's very difficult to process it. But at least if you understand who you are and how you're different, then at least maybe you could tolerate it, because you understand the unique role that the Jew plays in this world. So we're running out of time, but wish everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful week ahead. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but God willing, next course we'll be back on the 11:30 schedule and make sure that it's easy to enter the Zoom call. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you all for joining, and see you soon. All the best. Thank you.